Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk some more about the Pike scene in Star Trek Discovery. A few people complained that I kind of spoiled that scene in some of my videos, so I do apologize if I ruin it for someone. I do think it's best to see it in the context of the actual episode, so that you can get into it emotionally, to see the entire scene all the way to really get into it, so I do apologize if my videos kind of ruined that surprise for anyone, even though it's kind of 50-year-old spoilers, but I do understand how it could have ruined the scene for a few people. So I will be more careful with that, so I highly encourage everybody to watch at least that part of the episode fully, because I do think it's a very good scene. It did have a few flaws. Obviously the entire context of the rest of the episode is not that good, because it was all done through those time crystals, which is basically magic, the way it was done. So I didn't like that. I never really liked all the magic elements in Star Trek, but the other shows did also have those elements. And what I disliked most was not actually the time stones itself, but I did dislike all that silly setup of the trees growing up instantly, and the Vox baby being all grown up suddenly, even though they just left him there as a baby a few episodes before, and suddenly he's grown up and apparently has a very long life experience. He says that a whole bunch of people came to try to get the crystals and couldn't. So it's as if he lived there a whole lifetime, which doesn't really make sense. I mean, when exactly did all the other people appear? Did he kind of always exist there because they put him there as a baby, then he existed in the past as well as the future? So I didn't like all that silly stuff. It was way too magical, way too much like fantasy and not really science fiction. And also when they show the accident itself in which Pike got injured, I didn't like it that he basically just stood around and told people to get out and just waved his hands around. He didn't actually carry anyone to safety like it was described in the original series dialogue, in which they said that he went back in to pull out cadets who were still inside. So we should have actually seen him physically pick someone up and carry him outside and then go back in to get someone else and then get injured. He did kind of start to pull someone on the floor, but then he immediately got injured, so we didn't actually see him save even one person. So I think that's the most disappointing part in that scene. Other than that, I think it was very well done. We did see him being injured by the explosion and getting that same exact scar that the original one had, because I presume his later paralysis was not a direct result of injuries, but rather of the radiation poisoning. And then we have that flash forward scene in which he sees himself in the corridor in that same kind of wheelchair. It has the same spirit, it's similar enough to be recognizable, so I don't really have any problem with that. In fact, I'm glad they made it kind of more modern looking, but with the same spirit. The hair is a bit different. The original one had kind of blonde hair. And another thing that kind of bugs me when I think about it is that why does he even have hair if he was irradiated so badly that he got so messed up, yet he still has perfect hair? So it doesn't really make sense. I guess maybe not his entire body got irradiated, so maybe the top of his head remained okay. Or maybe it's a wig for beauty, we don't know. So this part is more the fault of the original series than this one. We cannot blame this show for being too faithful to the original. And before I discuss all the logical problems of the scenario of this kind of wheelchair in this supposedly highly advanced future, I first want to talk about the character of Pike and why this scene, I do think it's a good scene for the character to show why this character is such a good one. And this is one of the reasons I love this scene. It's not just because it's gory and scary and horrible and all of that, but also because I think it's a good character moment. We've seen all throughout season 2 that Pike is very noble kind of person. He's always willing to put himself in danger to defend other people, and the original one obviously had that same trait, since it was said that he got these injuries because he risked himself to go and save a few cadets, and that's why he got disfigured himself. But I think this scene in this show actually makes him even more heroic, because now that we know that he knew what is going to happen, and yet he still did what he did despite knowing the horrible fate it will cost him, that I think makes him even more heroic. And he could have done a lot of things differently to avoid his own fate, but because he knew that if he does any of those things, then other people will die, meaning those cadets that he rescued, which I wish they would have shown us more of how he actually rescues a few of them, and not just shouting and waving at them to get out. But we can imagine that was not the full scene. We can imagine he did in fact rescue physically a lot of those guys, so that means he knows that if he resigns from Starfleet, or if he refuses to be assigned to that ship, and if he somehow tries to escape his destiny, he will basically condemn those people that he rescued to die. And because of that, he doesn't try to change it. He probably doesn't know exactly when it's going to happen. And just think about what it means that he has to continue serving in Starfleet for many more years to come, knowing that any day, and he doesn't know the exact date, so he knows that at any time he might suffer this horrible fate. So he has to live in kind of constant fear, knowing the day will come in which he will suffer these horrible injuries, and yet he doesn't try to do anything to escape this fate. And not because of the crystal. That whole bit I didn't like. As I explained, I don't like the whole bit with the magic crystal that Vox's son told him that he cannot escape his destiny. I really didn't like that part, because then it might imply that Pike kind of doesn't try because he doesn't think it would work. But it doesn't really make sense, because he could simply just resign from Starfleet. But because he knows that if he does that, that means those cadets in that accident, a lot of them would die without him there to protect them, and therefore he decides to stay in Starfleet and to wait until that day, just so he could save those other people, knowing what it will cost him personally. And that, I think, makes him look extremely heroic, and that's one of the reasons I really like this part of the episode. And I like what this scene means for Pike, that he actually saw his future, he knows it, and yet he still remains in Starfleet, which I think very few people would do if they were so horrified. They showed him the most horrible thing you can imagine, basically, and yet despite this, he really stays on the mission. And that's one of the reasons I really love this scene. So let me now talk about kind of the logistical problems of this whole scenario of this specific kind of wheelchair, which doesn't really make sense even from a modern perspective of what kind of technologies we have today to help people with disabilities. I mean, think about Stephen Hawking, who was only able to move one finger and yet was still able to talk through a computer. Obviously, the original Star Trek show kind of failed to predict that kind of technology, and it's too bad, and so it's kind of a problem even in the original show. From a modern perspective, it doesn't seem very realistic. If he's able to give commands to the wheelchair to move around, we do see him being able to move around in the wheelchair with the power of his mind, obviously, and he is able to give a signal to say yes or no with the blinking light. So if he could do that, then why couldn't he also write a sentence? I mean, he could use a Morse code to write the whole sentence, or just to pick letters to form a sentence, just like Hector Salamanca in Breaking Bad, who was also in a wheelchair, also disabled, also able to move only one finger, and he used the little bell to say yes or no, but also if someone came to him and showed him all the letters, he would be able to stop the other person at the letter he wants to say, and that way write a whole sentence. It would take a while, but it can be done. And disabled people today have all kinds of technologies to help them communicate even under such conditions. I think there are even special programs who can read the eye movements, and so disabled people can even talk just with their eyes. They can write whole books, and so it's not really a problem to communicate if you can move at least something. So if Pike can create those bleeping yes or no's, then technically he should be able to write whole sentences. And I do think it's something even the original series should have understood. They should have predicted that ability. I mean, there is Morse code even. So there shouldn't be any kind of problem to write whole sentences. Also, we do see his eyes moving and so on. So I think there's a whole bunch of ways that you can communicate with such a person. Just like we saw with Hector Salamanca in Breaking Bad, he was able to write out whole sentences if someone helps him out. So I think this really is a problem even in the original scene of the original Pike. If you really think about it, it doesn't make sense that they are unable to get his full statement, that they are only able to ask him questions and he only can answer yes or no. I guess the only way to explain that is by saying that his brain itself is damaged, that his brain itself is unable to form whole sentences, and so it's not a matter of technology, it's more of a matter of his lucid mind. Maybe he's only able to be fully self-aware for short periods of time every day and not enough time to really write whole sentences. So maybe he's not lucid enough to do that, even though no one ever mentioned that. They all said that his brain is functioning normally. So the logical problem is that if he's able to send those signals with the blinking light, then technically he should be able to write whole sentences. Also, he's able to drive around in a wheelchair, so shouldn't he be able to write big letters on the floor? If you just attach some paint to him, he will be able to give him enough space and he'll write you whole sentences. So technically that scene doesn't really make sense if you think about it. So we cannot really blame Star Trek Discovery for this if it's something that was in the original Star Trek series and they're trying to tie it with that. Now we didn't actually see him talking in the Discovery, so maybe he is able to print out longer sentences using some kind of computer. We simply didn't see, so we don't know. So it's not really a problem here. We don't know if he only communicates by blinking. We do see that kind of light in the wheelchair, but maybe he is able to do more complicated stuff than he was able to in the original series. Now the problem that this show did create is the fact that they showed us another kind of disabled person who is in the body of a robot and is able to function totally normally, which is Airiam, the robot lady who was on the bridge for 2 seasons, and then they finally explained her origin in the same episode in which they killed her off, and they explained that she was a normal human who got into some kind of terrible accident, and after that she became the first cybernetically augmented human, and that creates an internal continuity mistake, because even before this episode with Pike, we also constantly see a crew member on the ship rolling around in a wheelchair. And even that's kind of an internal continuity mistake, because if you are able to give a robotic body to someone, then why is that guy still in a wheelchair? And I think that guy appeared since season 1. He appeared in the middle of season 1, and ever since then he's still in the wheelchair for over a year. So if the technology already exists to give someone a totally robotic body, so why does that guy not want to upgrade himself with robotic legs just like Airiam and to be able to walk normally if it's already possible? By the way, we had an episode in TNG in which Worf had a spine injury and was unable to walk, and then Dr. Crusher starts to explain to him that there are all kinds of ways to get him almost to full mobility again, and yet Worf refuses because he says he doesn't want to be a half Klingon machine, and so he refuses that treatment. But it's not really a continuity mistake with this, because Beverly did want to give him some kind of treatment that will make him almost fully mobile, so he might be kind of robotic, and he simply refuses that because he doesn't want to be too robotic. So it's not really a continuity mistake. That's why I don't raise that specific episode. And also I can accept the idea that this entire show is kind of in a new timeline, so it doesn't have to tie with other shows, but it should still have internal continuity and consistency. And so how can you show guys in wheelchairs and at the same time have that lady who has a full robotic body because of the accident that she had? One way they could have solved it is by saying that her technology is not actually Federation technology, that maybe she went to some other planet, she's not a member of the Federation, and that's where she got those robotic enhancements. So that could have explained it. Also, I do like the fact that they said she's the first one of her kind, so at least it kind of shows you that this is brand new technology and still experimental, so at least it makes it obvious that it might not be kind of widespread, but still I think with Pike, since he's such a decorated officer of Starfleet, then wouldn't Starfleet give him the best possible treatment? And so if that kind of technology is available, then wouldn't they give it to Pike? Now it's possible that Pike himself refused to get that kind of upgrade, maybe because of what happened to Airiam, because he knows that she was taken over by that evil AI, so he doesn't want something like that to happen to him, so maybe that's why he refuses outright whenever they can ask him that question, when he first gets that blinking light. Maybe they ask him the question, do we want to get a robot body? Which also means we would have to hook it up to your brain and maybe replace parts of your brain for that whole thing to work, and then he simply refuses because he remembers what happened with Airiam, and he doesn't want to be that way. He doesn't want to be a half robot, and so he prefers to be in the wheelchair. So that's one way to explain that away. As for the guy we constantly see in the wheelchair in the corridors, maybe he is on a waiting list, maybe he is going to get all kinds of upgrades, but it's not immediate. Maybe a specific suit needs to be designed for him, and so he's waiting for it. Maybe there are a whole bunch of patients like that in Starfleet, because, you know, they just finished a big war with the Klingons, so maybe there are a lot of other disabled people, so there is a very long waiting list, and that's why he's still in the wheelchair for over a year. Also, it's funny that we always see him using his hands to move himself, so shouldn't his wheelchair at least be mechanized? But I guess it can be explained that he wants to work on his arms, he wants to train his arms that way, and that's why he's doing it manually and not using a mechanical wheelchair, so I don't really have a problem with that part. So now let's get back to Pike. So why is Pike not being given some kind of better treatment? So as I said, it's possible he simply outright refused to get a robotic body like Airiam. He probably refuses because of what happened with the AI, and also because Pike is simply very old-fashioned. Maybe he simply doesn't like the idea of having parts of his brain replaced with artificial parts. Also, I think we can say maybe the first time we saw him in the original series and in this scene in Discovery, maybe it's just when he got his first wheelchair. Maybe they are planning to add a lot of other utilities to him, maybe they are planning to give him all kinds of upgrades, but this is simply the first stage in which we see him in. So let's say it happened 3 months ago, maybe up until this point he was in intensive care, in a coma, and only now he regained consciousness and was put into that wheelchair. And he first needs to get used to this one before he can get more upgrades and to be able to do more things. And obviously his face is still all scarred, and so why didn't they fix his face? Obviously that should be possible with this kind of technology. that scars are able to be fixed, so shouldn't they be able to fix his face? Now maybe we can say that the radiation he got is something that stays in the body for a while and keeps causing damage, so even if they heal up his face, it still gets all disfigured yet again, because he still has those strange radio particles inside of him and they cannot remove them completely right away, and so it will take a while, but eventually maybe they will be able to fix his face. So in short, maybe we saw him in the worst possible lowest point that he ever was or would be, because later they would actually fix him up better, but Spock didn't want to wait for that, and so that's why he did what he did, because he knew he would never fully recover, but probably he would not stay in that condition that we saw him in. So I guess it was really cruel by that crystal to show the Pike in Discovery his lowest point, in which he is in the most horrible shape of his life. I guess that was pretty cruel, but we can explain this away by saying that was simply his first wheelchair that he simply just got out of intensive care, and they simply didn't have time yet to give him all the other possible treatments and more additional gadgets that would not keep him so helpless as what we saw him. So we basically saw him in the lowest point. And as for his inability to communicate, I guess if he's able to blink, then he should be able to write a sentence if someone simply gives him the right tools or simply sits with him and to mark exactly which letters he wants to say, just like with Hector Salamanca. So why wasn't that done? I guess my only excuse is that he was not fully lucid. Maybe he only had brief periods of time every day in which he was lucid enough, and it wasn't enough time to write whole sentences before it would all turn into gibberish, because he kind of loses his awareness, or maybe he has a short-term memory loss, maybe he's simply unable to form a sentence, and that's why he can only respond to direct questions. And maybe the technology does exist to fix him up, but he simply refuses to get those treatments, maybe also because of that deal he made with the time crystal, because he knows that's his fate, so maybe he doesn't want to toy with that, since that was part of the deal which saved the whole galaxy. So maybe he doesn't want to cheat that fate which he chose, so maybe that's why he refuses to get additional upgrades to his condition. So I think I covered all these inconsistencies and I gave all the excuses I can think of to try to explain it. And if you have any more ideas, let me know in the comments and we can discuss it in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.